Welcome to the Rotary Club meeting of Santa Maria South. We're very happy that you're all here to join us. And as is our tradition, we'd like you all to rise so we can say the Pledge of Allegiance and to say a short invocation. So, here's the flag. Paul, would you like to lead us in the invocation?
Let's begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And where is she? Lisa.
Yes. Could you bow your heads with me, please? Lord, we thank you for bringing us here tonight. We thank you for this important information that we're able to share in our community. Thank you for our speakers who have come and for the meals that have been prepared for us. We ask that you would continue showing us how we can serve our community, open our ears and our hearts to hear what we have to hear tonight, Lord. And we thank you for all of this. Amen.
Amen.
Please be seated. While you all are enjoying your salads, I would like to introduce a few special guests. So the first special guest I'd like to introduce is my wife Karen, and she's already standing. Karen. Next, I'd like to introduce, and I'm sure most of you know this person, our mayor, Alice Patino. And council person, Etta Waterfield. There's another one allegedly coming, Carlos Escobedo, but he's not here yet. And I'd like to also introduce Petra and Omar Hernandez. They're the people who helped they're the folks who run Shred to You, and they helped us to raise the money which we are going to be distributing this evening. So, with that said, we're going to enjoy our salads for a moment before we have our first speaker.
Can I move the podium a little closer to the screen?
We don't want to block you. So if we can do it without blocking them. Okay, that's good. We can also put it on that side of the screen if that would be easy.
Well, I originally set up when this was over here. And,
yeah, well, we just moved it because we didn't want the speaker standing in front of people.
Oh, okay.
That's all.
All right,
So tell me what you need.
the podium is moved one foot that way, then it'll be a better chance of seeing both the speaker and the screen at the same time.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. And who's being blocked to go this way?
It might be these people having dinner, but we'll check and see. Put it where you need it, and then we'll
Is the
get
person, is the speaker standing behind us, or are we standing over here?
Where are you going to stand? Behind the podium or next to it?
Probably behind the podium.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So what do you
Is that your trade?
Yeah, we were on Skyway. If you're not here, we were right there.
Good evening, everyone. Please continue enjoying your dinner, but I just want to welcome you. My name is Lisa, and I'm a member of the Santa Maria Rotary Club South, which meets on Monday evenings. I want to welcome back those of you that were here 2 weeks ago. We had our first session with Santa Maria Police Department and Deputy District Attorney, And now we've got even more people here tonight, so I'm thrilled that you're here. Welcome if this is your first night as well. As you know, we're here to talk about human trafficking in our community. We're here to hear from April Wilson from Marion Dignity Health, and then we're also going to hear from Alan Torres from Casa of Hope. So I don't want us to take too much time because I want to allow more time for the speakers. So right now, please will you welcome April Wilson.
Hi, good evening. Can you guys hear me in the back? Or do you need me to speak louder? Okay. Hi, my name is April Wilson. I am a clinical social worker at Marion Regional Medical Center, just up the street, and I work in the emergency department as a social worker there. Marion Regional Medical Center is part of Dignity Health, which is part of Common Spirit. And just really quickly, this presentation is designed for employees, but just so that since you guys are not employees, you're not familiar with our mission, our values, and our vision. So just very quickly, as Common Spirit Health, we make a healing presence of God known in our world by improving the health of the people we serve, especially those who are vulnerable, while we advance social justice for all. And our vision, a healthier future for all, inspired by faith, driven by innovation, and powered by our humanity. And lastly, our values, compassion, inclusion, integrity, excellence, and collaboration. So thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for listening. Thank you to the local politicians for being here as well, and allowing me to speak on your behalf, on the behalf of Common Spirit and Marion Hospital. Unfortunately, I don't have any direct contact information. They don't give us business cards, but one of your members, Pamela Brown, works in the emergency department with me, and she knows how to get a hold of me if you have any questions. So the presentation this evening is going to be specifically, it's a tool that we use within our hospital to train residents and also doctors. And it's an acronym PAIR, which stands for 5 Steps to Victim Assistance, or PAIR doesn't stand for that, but it's basically 5 steps to victim assistance in healthcare settings. Unfortunately, this presentation is copyrighted, so we're unable to share it, but this is a tool that you can Google and just get general information about it anytime. So legal notice and disclaimer. These are some of the organizations that we work with in order to help make this presentation. As with any of the material that you have covered so far up to this point, we do caution that there is material that may be sensitive, and especially to those who are survivors of sexual abuse or have any type of interaction in these types of situations. The EAP line is not for you specifically, but if you do have questions or you do have concerns or there is something that comes up for you, please seek help and support for yourself from a trusted person. So learning objectives is basically educate about patient abuse and neglect and violence, assist patients with referrals to community agencies, and access resources and tools. So this specific presentation is an educational approach. So it's a tool just like anything else, like a wrench or a hammer or anything else that you would use specifically. Good? Could you just move the microphone a little closer? Better? Yeah. Thanks. Specifically, this tool is just like anything else that you would use for anything else. It's, you know, a checkbook, balance for your checkbook. I don't think people use those anymore, but anything like that. It's a tool just like anything else that you would use to do any other type of job. And really, it's a type of intervention. So in the hospital setting, we use the term intervention to describe what we're doing. In a medical setting, an intervention might be something like oxygen that's provided to you or CPR or something of that nature. So this is another ailment that affects all health systems of the body. And this tool is meant to address it in that way. It's really meant for human trafficking situations, which can really be anything and anything. And we try to use a trauma-informed approach, which basically means that we're taking the person's life situation in consideration, that we're not re-traumatizing them, that we're not giving them anything that is going to harm them further. For example, you wouldn't ask them to tell their whole story and insist that they tell you, because that would be re-traumatizing. So we want to try to avoid that. And trauma-informed approach is just like this really big term that just basically means without judgment, it's patient-centered and aware of how the traumatic experience might have impacted that person. It doesn't mean, it's just a big word, just like we use for, we have big words for everything now. Instead of saying, some other term, we have this, we're financially stable instead of saying rich or something like that. So we'll move on to the next slide here. So here's some more information about the trauma-informed approach. These are common spirits, guiding principles for trauma-informed approach, which include safety, trustworthiness and transparency, peer support and mutual self-help, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and consideration of cultural, historical, and gender issues. So basically, we're meeting the patient or person where they're at. We're not coming to them with our own ideas, with our beliefs, our faith systems. If that person is an atheist, we're going to support them in that. If they're a God-fearing Catholic, we're going to give them as much support as we can, because that's where they're at. Let's see. Oops, going the wrong way. So the first step in the PAIR tool is to provide privacy. For all of these steps, it's really important to use common sense. You're not going to go to a person and be like, oh, here's this brochure, here's a thing with all the steps on it. Like, just take a look. Because the second that they detect that they cannot trust you or that you don't know what you're doing, they're not going to believe you. So use common sense. And pay attention, to nonverbal communication and cues. So maybe they're not making good eye contact, and you'll find that a lot with human trafficking victims and survivors. They usually have no self-esteem and they have no spirit, and they're crushed to the purest sense of the smallest pea of a human being that you could be. So they're going to give you a lot of nonverbal communication and cues. So pay attention to that when you're working through the steps. So the first step in the PAIR tool, P, provide privacy. In the hospital, for those of you who have gone there, the emergency department is pretty busy. It's 42 rooms, and at any given time, there's sometimes 50 patients waiting in the waiting room. So there's not a whole lot of room for privacy or opportunities to really talk privately. Marion has the privilege that the hospital has mostly private rooms in the emergency department. So we're fortunate to be able to already cultivate an environment where people can have the safety to talk if they want. One of the things that I like to tell myself is that if it was me having this issue, would I want anyone to hear? And if I can't talk about it with my dad, I probably need some privacy. He's like the cursor for everything. If I can't say something to my dad, then I probably shouldn't be saying that to anybody, or I shouldn't be having that conversation in public. So that's kind of my thermometer for that. Really, whatever you can do to create a safe environment within the room. And you might see them, for us, we might see them 15, 20 times before they ever come and say, my cousin was making me do stuff I didn't want to do, and I just felt really uncomfortable. And then you might get some information, you might never get any information at all. So just keeping that in mind. Let's see here. Before we go on to prioritizing the patient safety, I do just want to add, for anyone that, for me, I'm a mandated reporter. In this setting here, I'm not, but at the hospital, I'm a mandated reporter. So that means if somebody tells me that they're being abused, I have to report it to child welfare. The goal is not to get the most child welfare reports or adult protective services reports, but rather by law intervene appropriately. So as a social worker, as a mandated reporter, I'm ethically required to report this information. Prioritizing the patient's safety. So many times when people come in, they either have their pimp with them, they have someone who speaks the local language, they have somebody with them that's controlling the things that they say and the things that they share. So that person often will not leave their side, which means that we don't want to intentionally separate them because it could be harmful to the patient, and also that we're not going to accomplish anything by doing that except for maybe having the patient harmed more once they leave our facility. So at any point during this tool, you'll see these two asterisks on the screen, and basically what that means is that that's where the tool would stop. So say you're talking to somebody and they say, "This is really weird, I don't want to talk to you, get out of my room." That's the nicest way I've probably heard. I think that in that instance, you would stop the intervention and you would just go back to doing whatever it is that you would do in terms of like regular medical care or whatever you're doing to intervene with this patient to support them. And safety is always the most important thing. So a hospital is number one in our mission to provide excellent health care that's faith-driven and data-informed and evidence-based. But two, patient safety. We have entire laws in our country, the HIPAA, Health Information Privacy and Protection Act, that really forbids anyone to be able to share any of your health information, and being trafficked or being in that situation is definitely one of those things that we want to keep confidential. So just whatever you're doing, if the person doesn't want to talk, if they do, just ensure that they're safe. If they're going to talk to you, that what they're saying is safe. So again, explaining the limits of confidentiality. This is something that is really specific to mandated reporters, but for me, I like to say if I think they're going to disclose something, if it's a juvenile, hey, I just want to let you know what you're about to tell me. I do have to report if you tell me that someone has hurt you, but it's intended to protect you, and that's what we have to talk about. And sometimes that gets them to stop talking, but if you ask somebody to make an admission or disclose something and you don't tell them that you have confidentiality, what they're disclosing to you could be dismissed in a court of law, which then the whole person's everything is gone in terms of being able to have any legal rights to pursue any type of support or anything. The second step in the CARE acronym is to educate. So we have privacy, educate. A lot of folks who come from trafficking situations, most of them have no idea that there's any other life available in any other way. They have probably lived in some horrific conditions throughout their life. They're likely victims of childhood abuse. They're more likely to have been in the foster care system, not having a consistent caregiver throughout their life, witnesses to domestic violence in their own home, if not directly aimed towards them. And so really what we want to do is normalize this for a patient. We're not talking about, your dad beat you when you were 4, and so I'm really sorry that happened. We're just talking in general terms. We just want to say, violence, this happens to people. It's not your fault. These things that have occurred are beyond anything that you had control over. And we're talking about people who've probably been victimized since they were a small child, if not born into that environment. And so having this conversation with them the first time is unlikely that it's going to change the entire course of their life. Really what we want to do is normalize and not shame them. So we're not trying to say, I'm going to change your life in this one interaction and I'm a crusader and I'm a savior. We don't do that. It's not trauma informed. But we do just want to educate them about these, different types of things that they're experiencing. Sometimes they'll say, well, a friend of mine, she was working out of a motel, and it's really about that person. That they're putting it in third person so that they can desensitize themselves and remove themselves, dissociate with the idea that this has happened to them. This thing says to use a brochure. I don't use brochures. It could put them in greater danger, and it's also, again, that idea that if you give them a brochure like, here, read this, you're not trying to connect. And what these people are actually looking for is a human connection. We're all hardwired for human connection. These people even more. So risk factors and indicators. It's helpful to know the types of abuse that we encounter. So domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and human trafficking. When we say human trafficking, we're talking about people who are either economically, there's multiple different categories. What we see primarily here in this area is for sexual type human trafficking, as well as labor trafficking. So it's very common that folks cross over from Mexico, they pay a coyote, thousands of dollars, usually tens of thousands of dollars to cross, and they owe a fee and they have to work, or there's indentured servitude that comes from other cultures. So most likely what we see here is minors that are involved in illegal sex trade and trafficking. So knowing what that looks like for these people, and I'm sure you guys have heard some of this from different speakers, but what you're looking for. And the saddest part about this really is that the women who are victims of human trafficking are usually between the ages of 10 to 12, and they've likely been groomed long before that ever happened. So we're not talking about, beautiful young ladies that are fully developed and, very beautiful and pretty. We're talking about girls, little girls that could be your grandchildren, that could be your children, and that is who is being trafficked. So it doesn't always look like the pictures on the posters and all of that. It could literally be anybody, anything, probably higher likelihood that it's an individual of color because they have a disproportionately represented within the human trafficking sector. Really important that if they don't want to talk to you, it's not personal. It really isn't. One of the best things that I ever learned from any training, from anything that I've ever done for any job was Q-tip. Quit taking it personally. And I have the ratty Q-tip on my desk that they gave me from that to remind myself. If you don't like my presentation, if you don't like me, if you don't like what I say, it has nothing to do with me personally. And the same goes for the patients and these folks that we're treating. They probably don't like anybody, including themselves, because everyone that they've come across has victimized them or taken advantage of them. So there's also a lot of different cultures within this area, and specifically within the population that we serve at Marion is a large population from Oaxaca, and they speak an indigenous dialect, Mixteco or Zapotec, and it does not, there's no anything in relation to Spanish or any other language, and it's very common that they don't make eye contact, they let other people speak for them. So just because that's their culture doesn't necessarily mean that they're being trafficked. It could present like that, but being sensitive to the culture. And if you're not sure, ask. Ask someone else, ask them. They're the experts on their life. So if they're not sure about what's happening, they will let you know if you ask them. And building rapport with them by asking them is a great way to try to open up a connection and a relationship. Our lovely brochures that I've never seen in our hospital. The third step is ask. So we have privacy, educate, and then ask. So once we have a conversation with them that's like probably I'm saying all this stuff, but it's literally going to be like 30 seconds to 2 minutes, if that. And you want to ask them like if there's any questions. So in a joking way, I like to say, do you have any questions, thoughts, suggestions, feelings, emotions, anything that you'd like to talk to me about after we've had this conversation? Because it's kind of a joke, but it also opens up the door that like all of these things could be happening and they might want to say anything. And sometimes they will say like, how long do I have to be here? Or why do I have to be here? Or when are you going to leave me alone? Mostly questions that are designed to break the connection because they can't have a connection because they're so vulnerable and they don't trust anyone. But they're testing. They're testing to see if you're going to respond to them. They're testing to see how you're going to answer and if you're somebody that you can trust. You know what, honey, I don't know how long you're going to be here, but do you want a sandwich while you're waiting? Would you like another warm blanket? All of these types of things that would encourage them to be able to be like, okay, April might not try to also traffic me. She might not report me or, take me away or whatever. And even if it's within the first few questions of talking, maybe she comes back or he comes back 10 more times and I make contact with that person every single time. Now they know. April's a social worker here I can trust. Allow time for discussion, which is really, they're not going to say anything to you and they're probably going to tell you to get the F out, so just expect that. And then know your tools so they can see confidence in the person so that they feel safer and that the person is able to have a conversation if they want one. I don't know any of you, but if you came up to me and had a conversation with me, I would do my best to have one with you. And I would try to do it in like a human way, not like a robot, like, hi, I'm April, I'm blah, 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 blah. Because I don't think anyone actually talks like that. But also then, you guys know I'm standing here before you in front of this podium saying all of this stuff, so I must know something, at least I hope so. And the same goes for these folks that you're working with in terms of, their issues and their concerns and the things that they've experienced is that they also want to know, like, are they going to talk to me like a robot? Or a lot of the times the nurses have their little carts that they go around on and they go, have you ever done this, and they're just like clicking the whole time and they're having a conversation with somebody that's like this and they never make eye contact and they never say anything. And I don't know about you, but that wouldn't want to make me tell anyone anything.
Right.
So, moving on. So some of our screening tools, these are just things in a healthcare setting that we use. Generally speaking, a social worker should be familiar with all of these things. If they're not, I would question whether or not they actually know what they're doing. Again, if a person you're not going to be like, tell me, is that guy in the lobby, is he pimping you? Because I want to know. That would be really strange. But again, going back to that type of question, like any thoughts, feelings, suggestions, questions, anything that you feel like you want to share or have questions, and they'll be like, April, I really like your watch. Thank you, I really appreciate that. They're making an attempt to connect. So coming up on the last two tools of pair, respect, and respond. A decline doesn't mean that they're not interested or that they don't care. It means that they don't feel safe. And if they say, I don't want to talk to you, get the F out, which they say a lot, you're just, okay, great, thanks. I'll get you some water when I come back and I'll let your nurse know if you need anything. You ask the nurse and I'll come back. So that type of thing. Also, fun fact, is that domestic violence has the highest lethality rate for all officers and emergency personnel that respond. So imagine if it's lethal for them, what it's like for the person who's actually in that situation. And the amount of fear that you have in your mind and in your heart about actually not being able to live because this person might kill you. So it's very real for our officers and emergency personnel that are responding. It's also that much more real for the victim themselves. So if the patient doesn't want to talk to you, if they don't want to be a part of your plan, be very and mindful of the fact that we do get triggered. We see a victim and we want to help and we want to say, Like, what can make this better? What can I do? Like, I want them to get out of the situation. And even if we feel that way, the person has to be ready to make that decision themselves. We can't force them to do that. So trauma bonding is basically some ideas of this. I made some notes here, are the cycle of abuse. So like the honeymoon period, the tension building, and the explosion, which is when the actual violence occurs. Physical violence, although emotional and mental violence occur in all parts of the cycle. It's very common. There's a more sophisticated model called Cartman's Triangle, which has rescuer, victim, and persecutor, and the roles, they all bounce around within that. And then Stockholm Syndrome. So that's like in a hostage situation, which basically human trafficking is a form of hostage taking, where the victim becomes connected to the abuser or the perpetrator, that they want to protect them, and you see that a lot in domestic violence situations. So maybe the person is asking you a question and you say, oh, well, that guy's trash, and they're going to totally turn on you because they don't want to hear that their person is trash, because that person is their connection to survival. Even if that person is harming them, they can't get any of their basic needs met without their PIN. Almost done here. You guys are troopers. So one of the things about social workers in our code of ethics that we talk about a lot is empowerment, voice, and choice. And this goes back to really what I was saying earlier about if a person wants to make the choice to participate or be part of something, that's really their choice. And the more empowered they feel to make that decision, the better it's going to be by the time they make that decision. Most people in domestic violence situations take at least 8 times before they actually leave, which could mean that maybe the 8th time they're very close to death, or they've been beaten very close to death all of the times, or there have been multiple overdoses or threats against their life. And so we really aren't here to make decisions for people. If they want to be empowered to make that decision for themselves, we want to encourage that. As long as they have the capacity and decision-making capability, you know, they're not intellectually or cognitively delayed, which would kind of occlude their ability to make healthy decisions for their choice, but also make them more likely to be victimized. And these folks likely have complex trauma involved in their system already. We're talking about multiple traumatic events compounded on each other and for multiple decades of their short lives already. So we're not going to undo that in one interaction, and we're certainly not going to, you know, do anything to treat that. We're just basically trying to see if we can intervene and make it a better experience for them. We aren't the rescuer. We're not there for that. We just want to be a steadfast person if they need it, until they're ready to make their own choice, to use their voice, to feel empowered, to get them where they want to go. So seed planting, I've done all kinds of, I don't know who those people are, but this wasn't not created by me. But in working in the hospital, I've worked in community settings, I've worked for group homes, I've worked with adults, children, all different levels of intervention for mental health. And in my role, we're not here to make grand gestures or grand changes. We're planting seeds. Seeds take a long time to grow. If you've ever tried to grow anything, I have not successfully from a seed, you know that it dies very quickly. And so we're planting multiple seeds to try to get some type of intervention going for this person on the multiple occasions that we see them. And specifically for young females come in with strange things like abdominal pain, multiple sexually transmitted infections, all types of things that are specifically related to the sexual trauma that's ongoing in their life. So have a reasonable expectation about your intervention. We don't grow rose trees and rose plants overnight. They take time. They have to be cultivated, and the same thing has to be done here with these types of people. That one of the things that I also like to remind people of when they call me is that when people come and see me, they're in crisis before they see me, before they get to the hospital, they're in crisis while they're at the hospital, and they're gonna be in crisis after they leave. My goal is not to fix their crisis. The hospital puts a Band-Aid on things. And likely, when you have gone to the hospital yourself for whatever medical ailment, it's also the same type of approach, and it's the same type of approach for these types of folks as well. So some other emergency resources, National Human Trafficking Hotline. They have these little tiny business cards at the hospital, but again, I don't really like to give them out because I don't know that it's safe. This is specifically for medical professionals. If I am interacting with someone in the hospital and they do disclose some type of abuse, I'll say, oh, this is Susie from whatever organization, and I worked with her before. She's going to take good care of you. If you have any questions, I can come and stay with you if you'd like, whatever they need to be able to be supported in that moment. We want to make sure that we're not just, you know what, I'll see you in 2 weeks when you come back after the next break. Okay, we'll be good. So that's definitely not something that we want to do. And then here's some more national hotlines. These are all readily available through Google. For us, if we don't document things, that means it didn't happen, and likely in these cases, they could go to trial, our documentation, our legal documents, so we want to make sure that we have that followed up with. And if you are going to document anything, make sure that it's objective, not like, I was really pissed that this girl, because that will not stand up in court. You're not an expert and your opinion doesn't matter. They want facts. So report to the appropriate agency, and again, mandated reporting in HIPAA, and that is basically the PAIR tool. In a very quick nutshell, I tried to go very fast, so I apologize if I went over. I just want to give two really quick scenarios of different situations. We had a Southeast Asian woman come in to the emergency room, and she was completely psychotic, and probably also an indentured servant, and working through that was really hard. She was being basically trafficked and taken advantage of because of her mental health and instability, and sadly a community member who was in a position to be able to help was also taking advantage of her. So that does happen here. And then we do have a large Mixteco speaking population here. It's very common for them to have relationships with very young girls. We've had the youngest a 12-year-old that was fully pregnant, and in a relationship with a much older man. So this is common within the culture. They get married, or they're betrothed or sold or whatever in their native village. They cross over, and then they're indebted to this person for helping them cross, likely having to pay coyote fees, and they show up at our clinics, and the nurses are aware of this tool because I have done this presentation and trained them, and they're fabulous because I'm a fabulous trainer. And so they say, oh my gosh, we have this 15-year-old girl here. She's looking for birth control. She doesn't know what her birthday is. She doesn't know what's happening. What are we going to do? And so I go in and assess. So I'm taking into consideration culture, what the girl says. Can I speak to her? If she speaks Spanish, can I have that conversation with her one-to-one without having an interpreter, so I can pick up on the innuendos and inconsistencies and things that nonverbal communications. In this specific case, it's very uncommon that any population, any female from that region, Oaxaca, wants to be on birth control. It's against their culture, it's against their religious beliefs, and that's what she was asking for. So she also didn't know her birthday, she didn't know who the people were that she was living with, so there's lots of flags popping up for human trafficking. This is also common for people who are undocumented. If they're undocumented, they don't know their birthdays. Their birthdays may be different. They cannot keep them the same. Or they might say it's July 21st and then they tell somebody else it's April 9th. Or they have different, maybe baby dad is 25 and she's 16, but he's falsified his papers so that he can work and get benefits instead of saying that he's also 16. So being able to kind of flush out situations, I think the biggest thing, if you take away anything from this presentation, is be conservative in your approach. Not everyone that you're going to meet is going to be a human trafficking victim. In this instance, this girl was just seeking birth control, which is fabulous, and I want more of them to be educated in that they can go to school and they can get an education and learn to speak English, and their family can have an even better time. They don't have to work in the field for their entire life. And that in this case, that's what the girl was doing. She was trying to improve her life. And again, it's just a seed planting. So if we could plant a seed with her, then she goes back and plants all of her seeds with everyone else, and then it hopefully spreads, just like a weed. So that is my presentation. I apologize if I went long. I tried to talk very fast. I don't know if there's any questions that I can't answer any specifics to any specific situations, but if you have any thoughts, questions, concerns, feelings, questions, suggestions, anything that I might be able to answer in this moment. I've stunned you all. Or you're terrified. I'm not sure. But either way, thank you for listening. Yes.
So I will break the ice and I will ask a question. So, and I kind of know the answer, but I'd love to hear it from you.
Sure.
Human trafficking is not just women.
No, absolutely not. It's a lot of men too, specifically in the labor trade market, and men within the sex trade trafficking industry, sadly, are transgender youth, are LGBTQIA plus youth that have been victimized through some source at some point in their life. But that's a great question. Typically we see women, but women are just as abusive, and specifically within the structure of pimping. There's a woman that's called the bottom bitch, and she works for the pimp, and she might get like more drugs or more kickback, and she's in control of grooming and getting more people to come in. And if there's a big demand for young males, specifically that don't have any tie to anything and they hate themselves, and so they're willing to do any type of act in order to get drugs, shelter, food, basic needs met, they're also victims. Great question.
So you were relying mainly on the nurse or the doctor to recognize the
Yes.
aging?
Which is why when they're clicking their machine and they're doing this and they're not making any eye contact, how could they ever determine? And I would say probably in almost the 2 years that I worked at Marion, I probably had close to a dozen screenings for human trafficking.
Okay, any other questions for April tonight? Now, April did share with me, hang on just a moment, Virginia. April did share with me that she may have to leave shortly after her presentation, so she won't be here afterwards for talking. But we do have her contact information, and we can get questions to her if you think of something later, because I know that's usually me. I think of something later. Oh, I should have asked, right? Virginia, go
I
ahead.
just have a question. So did you say that there were only 12 instances where you've been called in for over 2 years?
There's probably been at least 12 that I've worked on. There's probably dozens more that have flown under the radar for whatever reason. These people are magicians and masterminds at flying under the radar. They do not want to be caught because it's too scary. And there are some situations that I have encountered that I'm like, I don't know, and I go and assess, and they say the right things. A kissing cousin situation, and they both said we're in a consensual relationship, we're totally fine. And then a month later, came back and disclosed all of this additional stuff. And it's hard to tell because there's usually substance abuse involved and different factors where, not to discredit them, but how do you tell when someone is high as a kite that they're not experiencing some type of flashback or traumatic experience memory, or if it's actually happening? And that's just a human condition. I'm a human before I'm anything else, and I'm trained to see specific things, but if it's not brought to my attention or the person doesn't want me to know, I'm not going to know.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you, April. April, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I really appreciate the perspective from the the medical professions, how they're training their staff to recognize these things, how they are training them to deal with it. And I'd like to encourage all of you that if you are medical staff or not, this is all really important information to take away, because these are things you can remember as you're encountering people day to day in the community. One of the things I really appreciated that April shared is that they're planting seeds. And it's important to remember that one may plant, and one may water, and one may harvest. And so because she's planting the seed doesn't mean she's going to see it all the way through and see the end result of that case. But that may be the same thing with any of you. If you run into anyone in the community and you suspect any of these things, take those steps to heart and respect their privacy and ask the right questions and enter into a discussion and know that what you're saying may make a difference somewhere down the line. So thank you, April. I really appreciate it. All right, a little bit of an awkward transition because we're short on time, but you knew that going in, right? I told you that at the beginning. So, if you've been here both nights, you've seen a little bit of a progression. We started off with Santa Maria Police Department and Deputy District Attorney talking about what they're seeing as they're called into different situations in the community. Tonight, we invited April to share with us what they're seeing at Marion Dignity as they're being presented with different cases that come in to the emergency room specifically. But then I also want to introduce to you Ellen Torres. Ellen is the Executive Director of Casa of Hope, which is a safe house here in our community. It is a nonprofit organization. They're doing amazing things, and I'm going to let her tell you all about it because I could tell you a few things. My husband and I are very supportive of Casa of Hope and appreciative of the difference that they're making in this community. So I look forward to hearing what Ellen's going to share with you tonight. Please welcome Ellen Torres.
All right, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Good, okay. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to Rotary for recognizing the need to invite the community here tonight, to gather us all together to discuss this very, very important topic. And I want to thank each one of you in this place tonight. I see a lot of familiar faces. My mom is here, my husband's here, friends, family friends, and I am going to be sharing a little of my story tonight as a survivor of human trafficking. And so it means a lot to me that they're here tonight. So I'm thankful for this opportunity to share with you. And as Lisa had mentioned, the first night there was some reps from the local human trafficking division. And a day or so after that first night, I was chatting with an ex-homicide detective. He's in Florida, and he runs, it's IAHTI, which stands for International Association of Human Trafficking Investigators. I will be going to a conference there in late May, and we'll have the pleasure of meeting him, learning there's a bunch of different topics from, the human trafficking detectives to victim service providers, a lot of different resources that is going to better me, that I want to be able to bring back in the hopes to better the community. But I had been talking to him, and he had been encouraging me, telling me not to give up and to continue to step into as many opportunities that I was given to educate the community on human trafficking. And he truly said it best when he said, it takes some time to understand what human trafficking really is. He then began to share with me another story. And that story was that he'd been a homicide detective for over 20 years. And somebody came up to him and said, hey, do you want to earn another $20 on your paycheck? And he said, well, yeah. And so that colleague told him, well, take this course. And when he got to the course, it was on human trafficking. So this ex-homicide detective that knew nothing about human trafficking is now the president of this nonprofit agency that supports law enforcement officers, prosecutors, crime analysts with various different resources, training. There's some sort of a forum where they can gather and talk about, what's going on and help one another. And this is powerful right here. I'm taking this from their website. The Federal Bureau of Investigation lists human trafficking as the fastest growing business of organized crime and the third largest criminal enterprise in the world. So if you are concerned tonight about your children, our children, your son, your daughter, your niece, your nephew, your grandchildren, then you're in the right place tonight. It's through educating, through listening to one another, to hearing someone's story, like you're going to hear a little of mine tonight, a local story, hearing from the different sides, the emergency room, the detectives, all of it, the different agencies that are involved. That's what it takes to truly understand what is often referred to as the anti-trafficking movement. So I am going to share a little of my story tonight, and I will try to move quickly as well. Like I said, my mom is here, and I want to honor her tonight. And so I'm going to go into a little bit of this, but I'm not going to go into anything too deep. But I really wanted to provide some real-life examples to the community tonight of what's happening right here in Santa Maria. I was 16 when my parents decided to sell our home in Pennsylvania and move to Santa Maria. It was the summer of 1997, and my parents still had to sell the house in Pennsylvania, but they wanted me to start school on time. And so my half-sister lived here in town. She still does. But at that time, she had lived right next to Prescott Park in the Regency Estates. So I was living with her, her husband, her 2 little kids that are now grown. And I had probably been here about a month and a half. And my parents had gotten me a car so that I could get to school and get whatever I needed to get done without them here. And one day I was driving by Prescott Park, and I saw this older man. He started to turn right out of the park, and as I passed, he quickly made a U-turn and he followed me to my sister's home. I was so afraid. We get afraid of things, but like when you really know something that is really wrong and that fear is creeping up your back, that's what I felt. So when I got home, the man got out of the car and he was yelling, "Hey, come here." And I ran inside and I told my sister Teresa what was happening and her husband. And he ended up running outside and running the guy off. That fall, school started. As I said, I had my own car, and so I picked up 2 of my friends. My sister wanted me to go to school in Orchid, and she could only get me into Delta. And so picked up my friends every day. And before long, we noticed that we were being followed from one end of town to the other. So though this guy was always in a different vehicle, I quickly realized that it was the man that had followed me to my sister's home. This went on for some time, and my sister made me call my dad. And I was so afraid to tell my dad. You know, I was 16. I thought this was my fault. Like, I had to have done something, right? And I didn't know how my parents would respond. And so my dad, I told him and told my parents what was going on, and my dad packed his belongings soon after that and made the drive to California, leaving my mother by herself in Pennsylvania to sell her home. So my dad and I had to share a bunk bed at my sister's. You know, no one foresaw this situation happening. He was on the bottom, I was on the top. And my dad watched the situation for a while. And one day as I was heading off to school, he came outside. He gave me a quarter, back when they had payphones. And he said, if he's following you today, stop at a payphone and call me. I didn't want to do that, but I listened to my dad. And long story short, the guy was following me. And years later, I realized why my dad had me stop at that payphone and call him. I didn't know it at the time, but I believe that my dad needed to hear that fear in my voice to know that what I was telling him was truly happening. And he heard it that day. So when I got home from school that day, my dad took me to the police station, and he had me share with an officer everything that had been happening since that first day that he followed me to my sister Teresa's house. As soon as I began to explain the situation, what had been happening, the different cars, the different colors, the officer immediately knew who I was talking about and stated his name. He told my dad, he said, this is a 2-time felon, he's not going to want to touch your daughter, 3 strikes, you're out. He also told my dad that this man was from Louisiana and that his mother had moved to the Regency Estates right down the street from my sister. He was driving back and forth from New Orleans to California, trafficking, I don't know what, I know drugs and possibly people at that time. But I didn't know any of that. You know, I was so ignorant. That was not the life that, or the way that I had been raised to know those types of things. And so the officer also said that the reason I was seeing this man in different cars, different colors, was because he had a friend at the Santa Maria airport, and that friend had been allowing him to use cars there and thought he was evading the police, but obviously was not. The officer told my dad not to worry, as I said before, this guy's not going to touch her, he's already got 2 strikes, you know, and you're telling my dad that a 2-time felon is following his daughter. This was the first time I had ever really seen my dad cry, at least in front of another man. My dad was a manly man from Tennessee, and he told the officer these exact words. I moved my family to California to give them a better life. And though I did not know it at the time, this was the start of my journey into human trafficking. And when I say journey, I mean a journey. I lived in fear for many years. I remember having to beg my dad to let me go to Fresno State. Eventually he did, but I had to beg him. The last words my dad had spoken to this officer was that if the police aren't going to do something, I will. I'll shoot him. I was 16. Well, I really didn't know what was happening. I knew what was happening had to be my fault. The neighbors next door started calling me an end lover the day the guy followed me to my sister's house, not having a clue of what was really happening. The following continued, but this time I didn't share it with my dad. I think I did share it with my mom a couple times. The guy was following me around town. He would show up at my work. I was working at 7-Eleven on Stoll while I was going to Hancock. But there was no way I was telling my dad. I mean, we had a gun case in our house, and that was just the kind of guy my dad was. I believed him that he would shoot this guy. And so, and again, I thought it was my fault. I was 16. So, as time went on, the following turned into more than just one man. And I'm gonna just share parts of my story. I don't have time to go into everything. I hope that it makes sense to you all. But again, as time went on, the following turned into more than just one man. I would be with a friend, often with my best friend Monica, and the comments were always the same. Are they following us? Is that so-and-so? You know, like, or is our mind playing tricks on us? You know, like, always the same thing. And one of these guys that I can remember her so vividly calling him out as he was following us was heavily involved in the film department at Allen Hancock College. He was older than most of the other students, but he was well liked by students and faculty alike. He was just that kind of guy, and that's just the reason why he was in the position he was in. He had a TV show, he was a modeling coach, he was a videographer, a photographer, you name it, this guy did it. Whatever he could get his hands into, that's what he did. So again, to make a long story short, later in my life, this same man that I knew, because I had attended Allen Hancock College, I graduated with my associate's degree before I went to Fresno State, walked into my church in Orchid while I was singing on the platform. I was praise singing for altar call, and this guy came walking down the aisle with his hands lifted as in surrender to Jesus. And I can't go into all the details again for sake of time, but this man ended up coercing me out of the church. He started taking me to a music studio that was owned by a well-known comedian in Hollywood that had started a record label here. The man that had begun following me when I was 16 was signed to the label. It was him and a few others. And I will say that this studio was pretty much a cover for human trafficking, drugs, meth, ecstasy, and I'll say it now before I forget, because I know I didn't write it in here. They had been feeding me ecstasy pills to the point where my mother found a pill on the floor. They were giving me so much, and I would just stuff them in my sock drawer because it was just so much. So a couple of the other guys that came to live in Santa Maria from New Orleans came after the flood. And that's just one example of these men as being a part of this network of traffickers that continue to grow larger and larger. One night I went to a local club. I knew that I would be drinking, and I gave a friend my car keys, and he was going to drive me home afterwards. That night, I was forced into a van, taken to the local radio station, where I was drugged with horse tranquilizer and methamphetamine. Again, I won't go into all the details, but these traffickers, including a local DJ who was known for DJing events locally for our kids, our junior high and high school at the Toyota or one of those car dealerships, was the one that put me in that van. They wanted to break me that day, and they did. They absolutely did. The next morning, I could not crawl to the bathroom. I had to pull the rug and slide on my stomach to get there. My mom could not understand what I was trying to tell her. I was too drugged. The next day, my mom realized, kind of piecing things together and mulling over it and trying to figure out what happened. And then she took me to Marion Hospital. It was, I believe it was Labor Day weekend when that happened. It had been I'd gone out that Friday night. I was attacked in the early morning Saturday. The detectives that were sent to my case had been watching football. They let us know. They let my mother and I know. They would have to drive us to Santa Barbara for the SARP exam, and they didn't feel like it. When I did go for my SARP exam, my sister Teresa took me, and there was some cuts, there was some tears, there was some bruises, but it was too late. It was too late. One thing I want to say about something that was said earlier, yes, they might be high. Yes, there may be a lot of factors, but believe what they say. Just believe. Just believe them. It's not hard. Just believe. My doctor said it looked like I had been dragged, as if I was already dead in a body bag. The detective said I needed to go to the station that week as soon as possible to call the DJ who forced me into the van. They said it would show up as a payphone, and I needed to get him to talk about it, because remember, I had been drugged. They said if you do it this week, then it's less likely people will find out, he won't hear about it. Like, we have to do this as soon as possible. It's so important. And this is the detectives telling me this. They never called. I ended up calling maybe a week and a half later, and the detective told me the FBI was in town, and there were cases that took priority over mine. I called a month later. I was told the same thing. What I heard in my mind was I didn't matter. They finally called myself and my mom 3 or 4 months later, and there was no way that I was going to trust these people that were, number one, too busy to stop watching football, and number two, too busy with the big FBI bust that was going to make headlines, which it did. This was the big bust with MS-13 years back. And I have to tell you, I wonder sometimes if they had just sat and listened to me, how connected my story to that story might have been.
Absolutely.
These men were putting women on Craigslist. The guys that were from New Orleans, they would take their ID cards that were from New Orleans. They would take it to the hotel and they would say, hey, we were in the flood, we don't have anywhere to live. And they would either give them a discount or they would give them a hotel room. Anything that they could take advantage of to not spend the money that they were making from these women, from the victims. So they, again, were putting women on Craigslist. They would take a picture of their victims and put it online with a phone number. And just as an example, if it was a younger girl it would say something like fresh off the boat. Something to kind of say like, I have a 12-year-old, I have a 13-year-old, I have a 10-year-old, fresh off the boat. At this time, my dad had passed. I was living with my mom, my older brother. These traffickers would show up at my house. They would force me to go with them. Or I would just go because I was afraid. I was afraid of them, what they would do to me. I was not wanting my mom or my brother to see, you know, it was like me. There was some sort of shame, like this was my fault still, right? One time this guy showed up at my house. I'm going to give a few examples. This particular guy was originally from Philadelphia, but he had moved to Lompoc. That day he forced me to go with him. I had been at home. I had to call my place of employment, I was working, and let them know that I couldn't come in that day. The guy drove me to Lompoc, picked up a friend, and put 2 big black duffel bags in the trunk. We drove to Los Angeles. He had me sit in the front with him, and he made me smoke marijuana. When we got to Los Angeles, we arrived at a normal-looking neighborhood, a normal-looking house in a normal-looking neighborhood. We went in the house. The house was full of half-naked women. He told me later that that was the Hoe House, a brothel, a modern-day brothel, basically. He would tell me things like he was going to get me pregnant, so I would be stuck with him. He would tell me how beautiful I was, and, you know, all of these things trying to build me up. And I later found out that this man had 16 kids with 16 different women. Another time, I was taken to a hotel in Arroyo Grande. The trafficker stood outside the hotel room. It had been, like I mentioned, put on Craigslist. And the trafficker stood outside the room as myself and another victim went inside to the buyer. This was probably his bottom girl, as the speaker before me mentioned. She was supposed to be training me. The trafficker was what is often referred to in the movement as a guerrilla pimp. He would physically beat his victims and, use physical violence to control them. This particular trafficker didn't allow victims to get high, and he had very set rules that had to be followed. The sex buyer, literally had a table of drugs when we walked in the room, just spread out on a table. And he said, please, get whatever you want to get. Every kind of drug was on that table, as well as paraphernalia to use it to get high. And so the girl that had been there to train me, the victim, picked out what she wanted to get high with, which was crystal meth, and told the buyer we should all go into the bathroom so the trafficker couldn't hear. It literally seemed like just seconds, and the trafficker was pounding on the door. The victim continued to get high, and he continued to pound on that door. It's one of those sounds that's just hard to forget for me. There are rules to this, and each trafficker's set of rules must be followed. Everyone is different. Some will drug you, some will say you can't get high, some, it's all different. So this victim continued to get as high as she could because ultimately she knew she was going to be beaten severely. So she wanted to be as high as possible. Again, I don't have time to go into much more of my story, but what I can tell you is that I am one in a handful of a few that was able to escape this life. It's often referred to as the life. I was able to escape that shame, escape the brokenness that comes with all that victims of human trafficking endure. Today, I am married to my best friend, a man that has allowed me to pursue my dreams and sacrifice so much in order to heed the call to fight the good fight against human trafficking on the Central Coast. My husband and I are Casa of Hope. Connie Lojman, our late founder, is Casa of Hope. We have given our lives to get this safe house up and going. We've been living in the safe house. We have our own house, but we're doing what we have to do to support this community and support victims, survivors of human trafficking. When I was asked by our late founder, Connie Lojman, to step in as executive director of Casa of Hope, I was actually working at Housing Authority in San Luis Obispo. I had gotten my life together, got into church, music director of my church, just all these great accomplishments, but I was working my way up the employment realm and just got a job at Housing Authority, great insurance, good pay, and Connie asked if I would step in and take over the safe house. Connie had been sick, she'd been ill, and we immediately began to plan for secession. She shared her hopes, her dreams, her commitments to the agencies, the things she was not willing to compromise on. We were able to bind together and work through those things before she passed in October of 2021, which was also very unexpected. For it to come so soon, I guess I would say. So my husband and I, we had just moved to Grover Beach, and to be a little closer to my job, packed it all up with the help of some loving friends, and we moved immediately into the bottom portion of the first safe house that was open. We do only have one safe house, I want to say that. But shortly after we moved into the safe house, all hell broke loose. Connie fell, broke her hip. My husband got ill with valley fever. I didn't even know what that was. They were ready to start hospice. The owner of the home got stomach cancer and fell ill. We got our 60-day notice to vacate, and some of that time I'm still making the drive to San Luis and working 2 jobs, running the safe house, taking care of my husband. But I am grateful to say today that we were able to get through that, and God provided. We now switched locations. We have our beautiful Gate Safe House program in the area. It's a confidential location. And again, my husband and I are living there because that's what we need to do right now to make this happen. And so I am not ashamed to say that we sacrifice much to give back and get this house going. So currently we are renting a 4-bedroom home, $27.50 per month. That monthly rent is draining our account, as you can imagine, through this pandemic. And I know it's by the grace of God that we're still standing today, and it's for Him that we're doing this. Our program is called The Beautiful Gate. And so I want to share with you our hope and our prayer is that someone somewhere is going to give us a house. Someone somewhere is going to give us a house. Human trafficking on the Central Coast is a problem. It's a serious problem. If I came here in 1997 and was here for only a month or so and became a victim to this, I can only imagine how it's grown today. So with that being said, we absolutely need the community's help with that. We're a Christian program, and so we rely solely on private donations and fundraising efforts. Thank you, Shred, to you. I see that you're here today, and the Rotary, for all that you've done to support us. We cannot do it without your help. We just can't. We don't accept fundraising, or we don't accept government grants simply because, as far as I know, it doesn't support Christian programming. So, yeah, so we rely on our community to help us. Am I at the end of my time? Yeah, all right. You are welcome to go on our website. What I will say about Casa of Hope is that we have embodied the vision of our late founder. Her first hope for the house was that a Christian couple would live there and be the example for these women, be there for these women at all times. And ultimately, through a process of trial and error, that's what's happening.
I feel certain that several of you have questions for Ellen, such as how many traffic victims they have in their home now, where they have come from, all of those things. And I want to allow some time for that. But first, because I want to respect the time of those that need to leave, we do want to present Casa of Hope with a donation. And Vicki, I was wondering if you would mind just coming and saying a couple words about the fundraiser and taking care of that. And then after that, those of you that need to leave, please feel free, and I'm hoping Ellen will remain to answer a few questions for anyone else that can stay.
Well, I have to say that we have been interested in your project for some time, but the opportunity that we got to help a little bit, and this is just hopefully a first donation, we partnered with Shred to You for their 10th anniversary, and they graciously gave us 3 days of free shredding. We charged $6 a box for the people that participated, and thanks to any of you who brought us shredding. And we are giving, today the check that we're giving is thanks to all of you who brought shredding and all of the community members that brought shredding, and to our volunteers that helped, and to Shred to You, of course. We had, in addition to the advertising and everything they did to help promote it, they bought a TV that we raffled, and they bought some barbecue kits to give away, and it was a really good event. And as we said, it inspired us, I think, to consider doing a longer term project on your behalf, and we're talking about that now. So we're really pleased to be able to share what we made with you. And Omar and Petra, do you want to come up?
What's the amount on that check? I forget.
$4,143.
$4,143. Almost too much.
And keep in mind that this is largely the result of Petra and Omar's generosity.
Yes.
We would not have been able to do this without their help and without everything that they did above and beyond what this check represents.
Yes.
So we thank you two. And we know that this is going to a great, worthy cause that's going to support our local community. So
Thank you for your presentation.
thank you. And you don't get to keep this check. You get to keep this
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
With that said, if you have any questions for our speaker, please go ahead and ask. It's the official end of the meeting, but you're welcome to stay around and fellowship and or ask more questions.
You know, I have a comment because I think it's really important, not only that we get educated, but all of this come from probably different points of view. But when we have governments that neglect this kind of thing, we have administrations both at the federal and state level that ignore this, and we have an open border. You know, we really need to be vigilant. We, just like city council, ask us the questions. We have to be accountable. State representatives, they have to be accountable. And don't be afraid to ask those questions because they're important. If we're going to save these lives, they're important.
How many people in the house currently? For how many can you hold?
So what I will say is that we can have up to 6 survivors at a time. That number changes. And I just want to be careful because we don't want to give any identifying information. And if you see my husband or myself outside or around town, please, you know what's going on, right? So just ask you to be kind and respectful. And again, you don't want to ask questions. Just know that we're doing what we were called to do. And in all honesty, it's my husband and I. I have to raise the money. I have to run the house. I'm doing this all by myself right now. We lost our founder. And the reality is you can't just bring in a volunteer that has never been trained, doesn't even understand what human trafficking is. It's only going to hurt rather than help. I do believe we're going to get to that place. I'm not trying to be negative by any means, but there's going to be some training, some education that has to take place before I allow anyone to come in our home and work with our survivors, because I don't want to see anyone hurt more than they already have. And one thing about our program is we are survivor informed and we are survivor led. There will always be a survivor leader in the house, someone that has lived experience. And I do want to say thank you to the mayor. I appreciate that.
Yes.
It's not easy to share what I've been through, but I know that there's purpose in my testimony. And I am willing to share, whatever is needed, whatever is right, whatever is appropriate, so that I can help to better educate the community and save our children.
Any more questions?
I think I have a comment. I too would like to give honor to you as a survivor of domestic violence and sexual assault. I absolutely know what type of courage it takes to stand in front of a group of people and do what you do, and to be where you are running that house. I just applaud you, and I just send blessings to you and your husband and all of those women and children that you are having to take care of. I know that that's a big thing. If I can be of any assistance, I am right there for you. The second thing is, are you, and this is just a random question, are you working with other safe houses and being able to swap resources kind of a thing?
Yeah,
Okay,
so I think that's a great question. And as a community, we have to be open-minded, because there are going to be times that we need to get victim survivors out of this area. And that's the term we should be using, victim survivors. They are a victim until they decide or they're able to come into a program. Then they're a survivor. Then they transition to an overcomer as we begin to work with them. But we work with the National Sheltered Alliance. They have a national referral system. So if we need to get a victim survivor out of the area, I go online, I print out a paper, they fill it out, their likes, what they don't like, what kind of situation, what kind of trafficking. Is it familial trafficking, which is, family trafficking? There's all different types of trafficking. And so they'll fill that paper out. We'll put it in the national referral system. We'll get a bunch of emails back, and from all over the United States. And that victim survivor has the ability to choose which program they want to go to. Again, our program is a Christian program. That might not be right for every survivor, and that's okay. We would take them in, right? But then we would help them find something that is more appropriate to what they believe, what they like, that type of thing. So we have to be open-minded as a community, and our house has taken in survivors from out of state. I actually flew out of state to go pick up a girl because, you talk about a warm handoff, right? It was possible, and so that was the best way to do it. To actually go there, walk her through everything, hold her hand on the airport, bring her into the house. When we can do that, we will. And that's thanks to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. I heard they had some airline tickets. I utilized that service before removing a survivor from the area to another state. And I gave it a shot, called them, and they were willing to do it. And so we were able to make that transition, which is always better, right, to have that extra support. So yes, absolutely. And we will have survivors, throughout the years from other states. So, did you want to say something, Mom?
Well, I think you kind of touched on it there, where you do more than just, you work with other people.
Yeah, and so that is our mission statement. We do have a safe house, the Beautiful Gate program, which is in accordance with Acts chapter 3, the beggar that they laid daily at the temple gate called Beautiful. And 2 disciples came walking by, and they said, "Silver and gold have I none, but such as I have give I thee. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk." That's our safe house program. But we also, part of our mission is educating communities, bringing awareness. We do outreach. We go out, we bring food, we bring water, we bring supplies, so that we can start building these relationships, right, with women in the community that are homeless, that are out there, that think there's no way out of the situation that they're in. Yes.
Can you just explain a little bit about the process after you bring somebody in to the safe house? Like, what do you do with them as far as helping them stay out of that life? Because it's so easy to go back in, and it's just like domestic violence, which says it takes, they may go back in and then you find them again a few years later or whatever. What do you do to try to help them, education or training or something?
Yeah. Most importantly, we love them. We love them at all costs. Every time we have a new survivor come in, we have to readjust. We have to rethink what we do. We have to adjust so that everybody is in harmony with one another. But love is the answer. It truly is. God is love, and He is the answer. And, when I was going through what I went through, and I came to know God and the Acts 2:38 message, which states, "Repent and be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ, for the remission of sins, and you shall receive the gift of the Holy Ghost." That Holy Ghost, that Holy Spirit has sustained me in my darkest hours, in my darkest nights, when I have, I wake up kicking and punching and, screaming. That Holy Spirit is what has held me through those darkest nights, through the midnight hour. That Holy Ghost is what has kept me. God has kept me. So we love them. We do human trafficking education in the house. And you will find that not every safe house does that. Some think it's re-traumatizing. And, you have to be sensitive. Like I said, we adjust to each girl that comes into the house. But the recidivism rate for human trafficking is way too high to not educate these women. We have to tell them. The majority that come in the house don't even know that they're victims of human trafficking. They don't know what that is. They don't know that their trafficker or their pimp or their boyfriend has been trafficking them. Like, they don't even realize what they've been going through. So we teach them the influences, because there are influences, media, movies, songs, TV shows. There was a TV show called Pimp My Ride. We glorify that word pimp, and so, and one thing I want to say too is we need to educate our young men. We need to educate them, because they're learning that this is okay. It's okay to take my 16-year-old girlfriend, take her to my friend's house one night and make a little money. That's trafficking. That's human trafficking. And it's happening, believe me, it's happening. The guy that walked in my church that was well known in the film department at Hancock, I didn't know he was a trafficker. I didn't know he was a pimp. And later, one of the girls in my youth in the youth department at my church was kind of laughing. She said, "Yeah, you didn't know he was a pimp? He sits outside Santa Maria High School every day looking for little girls." So we have to educate them, because I guarantee you that these older pimps are teaching the younger ones or the younger guys to become what they are. And the word pimp is glorified way too much to think that it's cool. Yeah.
I just want to make sure I'm not being. So I'm assuming that this home is for adult females over the age of 18.
Yes.
Are they ever allowed to bring their children with them?
We're not in a place right now where we can do that legally. However, I would love to be able to do that, because there's not a lot of places that provide for that. And I'll be honest with everyone here today, I'm still learning what it means to be an executive director. I really am. I know how to love and I know how to work with these women, but I have a lot to learn. I really do.
So when they're children, does the county or the state take over that child, right?
So if they're a trafficking victim?
No, well, the child is with this female who's an adult, the mother who has this child. Now, what happens to that child?
So I think, what will happen a lot of times is that the victim survivors don't end up going into a shelter. They'll go back into their situation. They'll end up going into a local homeless shelter. There are other programs, but again, those programs are not necessarily fitting to their needs. Yeah. I've had women in our home that were as young as 5 when they began being trafficked. 10 and 12 may be like the common age, but it's all ages. There's not one particular age that's not what I've seen. It's all ages. And I've seen it as young as 5. Yeah. Yes.
So because your home is for women only, what about young men that get exposed? Is there a home for them?
There is one that I know of currently. I can't recall if it was in Texas. But again, please call us. If you have a child, call me. I will do whatever I can to help. We have access to this national referral system, so if it is a young man, we'll get them in the referral system. I know there's at least one home. There may be 2, but I know there's at least one. Mm-hmm.
And do you guys find it being more difficult to point out or to see that a young boy is being exploited or trafficked? Because I think boys will hold it in because they're so embarrassed that they're being trafficked and that they should be able to take care of themselves.
Yeah.
And then also some boys that are heterosexual, but then they get trafficked into the homosexual world. There's so much shame.
Yeah.
Is there a difficulty in seeing those boys that are in need?
You know, I think every situation is difficult, and the best thing that you could do is look at each human being as exactly what they are. They are a person. And I will say that I do think, obviously, you know, men are men and women are women. And so men struggle with some things more than a woman does. And so I absolutely think that it could be harder to pull that out of a male than a woman. But there's signs, there's ways to identify, there's ways to know and recognize when someone is struggling with human trafficking. And I know there's going to be more opportunities where, you know, we can talk about those things and go through that, influences, all that stuff, the different types of trafficking, the different types of traffickers. There's just so much to this, but yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, that's a little bit harder in some ways. Any more questions?
Question, you're on a budget, obviously, and you're very grateful for what they presented to you.
Yes.
What about all of us? And we have so much stuff at home. We have sheets we want to get rid of and pillowcases. Can we just call you and say, do you need anything? It's clean, it may not be brand new, it's in good shape. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, we always accept donations. I would say, you know, I would remind you that it's my husband and I, and we do get calls all the times for donations, and we are so grateful. And sometimes, you know, I try to always ask the donor, you know, would you be okay if we sold this in a garage sale or something like that? You know, so just kind of know, you know, that we get so much, and that might be the case. But in all honestly, we need monthly donors. That's what we need. I get asked all the time, what do you need? What do you need? We need monthly donors. That's what we need. Again, by the grace of God, we have stood through this pandemic. We had one big supporter that pretty much covered our whole rent. But when the pandemic hit, they pulled out. And at the same time, I had been hired on a very low salary, but a salary. I ended up having to go back on Medi-Cal. And so, you know, I'm doing my part. My husband's doing his part. We need the community to do their part. We need monthly donors. We need that support. $27.50 a month plus utilities. Our account is just slowly going down. And I totally believe, I have no doubt, I don't stress about it. I pray, and I know that God is going to provide because it's for Him.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. We've had, for those of you who have been here for the 2 weeks of sessions, they've been awesome. They've been informative, and if you're passionate about this issue, there are people that you can contact. You can grab a hold of it. You can contribute whatever fashion you feel like, monetarily, goods, whatever. But we thank you again for coming and for your support. And again,
thank Lisa.
Oh, yes, thank Lisa for setting up the program.
I would like to just say one thing before you leave. I'm in talks right now with the other Rotary clubs in our group. There's 3 in Santa Maria, 1 in Napomo. We're looking at trying to plan something for January, which is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. A little more extensive than just this 2 nights, maybe some panel discussions. It's all being kind of formed. It's in my head. But anyway, so if you purchased your ticket for tonight or the 2-night series on Eventbrite, I do have an email address for you. If you emailed me about tickets, I have an email address for you. And as these plans start to get more finalized, please expect to receive an email from me about that. If you're not interested, just let me know and that's okay. But I just want you to know you'll probably get an email from me talking about further plans on a larger event next January. Thank you for coming.
That's all right. That shirt, my other shirt. Unexpected fines, just a week after I got my back surgery. Yeah, I went to visiting about
Yeah.